Life.Church created this podcast because we all need healthy conversations with real people. So this podcast is here to help you start real conversations with your life group, friends, and family. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. This is Abigail.
And this is Jason.
So I wanted to share something that I've noticed about myself lately. Is that okay?
Yes, do it.
So when I am tired, I swing to one of two extremes. So the first option is that I get incredibly delirious and literally everything is funny to me. Like the other night after a super long day, I was just scrolling through Instagram, watching videos, and the most mundane 30-second clip of a dog had me in tears. Like my gut hurt. I was curled up in a ball on the floor, crying. I was laughing so hard at this 30-second video.
What did the dog do?
I don't know, like cross the street or something. Like it was a very simple video.
Now I have to know, what's the other extreme?
Okay, so the other extreme, now I led with the good one. So the other extreme is that I get really, really cranky. It's definitely borderline mean or angry. There's some snark, maybe sarcasm.
Let's not get there today.
Yeah, let's not.
Okay, so it's interesting hearing you talk about what you do when you're tired, because I'm thinking like, okay, what do I do? And I think I just don't admit it. And so, yeah, I hate naps. I don't do that. I'm thinking of a time, this was a while ago, I was working a job at a restaurant. And I had 2 10-hour shifts, kind of double shifts back to back. And I think it was like around Thanksgiving, and I just driven back from relatives, and I go and I work, and I'm feeling kind of weird maybe. And then by the middle of the shift, I'm feeling really bad. And then I go home that night and I have a fever, so I take an Advil and go to bed. So I wake up in the morning and I have a fever, take an Advil, go to work a 10-hour shift. I feel terrible all day. And so I go to church and I'm thinking, I think there might be something wrong with me. I start Googling my symptoms.
No.
And Abigail, I had appendicitis. I had to be rushed to the hospital.
What?
My appendix literally began to burst. They got it out in time. I was fine. And I'm doing better at paying attention to when I'm tired. But yeah, it might be a problem.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I just hope that you really are paying attention to where you're at more.
I'm better. That was a while ago.
The good news is that you only have one appendix, so it's not like you're going to go through that specific experience again.
Yes. And if you couldn't guess by now, today's episode is all about rest. And we'll be looking at these questions. What is rest? Do we really have to do it? And how do we do it?
I really like those questions because I know that they're questions I find myself asking often. And I mean, rest is all over the Bible, from the Old Testament, where God literally commands his people to practice the Sabbath, which is an entire day designated to rest. And then in the New Testament, we can see Jesus retreating to be alone in rest.
Right. And it's not just Jesus who rested. In Mark 6, after Jesus has just sent out his 12 disciples to preach to the communities and towns around them, he also calls them to rest. Mark 6:31 says, "Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. And so he said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.'" Jesus invited his followers to rest.
I love that. And I don't think rest is an option. And after listening to this week's conversation, I don't think anyone will be able to consider it an optional activity either.
Yeah, and if we do, you might lose your appendix.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just kidding. I hope you don't. So one of my favorite people to talk with about rest is Josh Brower, and we've had a great conversation with him that we're going to share with you today.
So what I do at Life.Church is oversee several operational teams at all of our campuses. They focus on a good portion of our volunteer expression. So there's thousands of volunteers in our operations and our guest experience. And I also focus on some of our analytics and in our new locations at Life.Church. So kind of a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things. I get to work with great leaders who lead all those departments. So it's a blast.
So how'd you end up in leadership at Life.Church?
Yeah, so I'll make a really long story really short. I actually started ministry in 97.
Okay, that's when Allie was born.
Right,
I was
right.
95,
right.
y'all. So give me credit.
Great. No. So I was youth and worship pastor, and most of my life I've been in ministry. And at Life.Church, I've been on a team for 13 years. I started in 2007 at our Albany, New York campus when we launched it. So I was the launching campus pastor of that.
Okay.
So that's my journey in ministry, but also at Life.Church as well.
So would you tell me, what are some of the things that you just love about your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Many years ago, we kind of were all discovering what our vision is. Like, can we write a vision statement? And I had vision statement envy because mine came out really simple compared to others, and it was just helping others succeed. After I got over the envy, I just embraced it, honestly, because I love it. If I can help others succeed, I feel successful. So I don't need to do anything myself, just helping others do it. And I've just found a joy in ministry doing that.
So over these decades of being a pastor and discovering this passion to help others succeed, has your work ever gotten in the way of your family or gotten in the way of rest?
Yeah, back when I was a pastor of our Albany location, it was late 2007, and my daughter was born on a Saturday.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, wow.
Now, we have Saturday and Sunday services.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, man, like, she's born on a Saturday. Well, I can still leave my church this weekend, right? Yes. My wife wasn't really like upset about it, believe it or not, because I was actually bringing my son into Life Kids, and she didn't want me and my son hanging out the whole time in the hospital room. But there's a sensitivity and an understanding that I had to realize that not everything is dependent on me. And my boss at the time called me out. I remember that conversation clearly. And then he started asking me things like, when's the last time you took time off? When's the last time you took vacation? And I did not have very good answers for those questions. And I started really searching about my own priorities and in that area.
So what do you think it was that made it so difficult for you to take time off?
Have you ever heard the phrase, do something you love and you'll never have to work again?
Yeah.
That's it. It's like, well, I'm not working to begin with because I just love this. And then the second thing is not understanding that just because I love what I do doesn't mean I can't be better at it. And one of the key ways I could get better is by operating more in biblical obedience in terms of rest and understanding what rest really was and how God could use it to form me into something even better than I was at the time.
What I love about the story you just told is that your wife has a baby on the literal Hebrew Sabbath.
Yep. I want to hear it. Go ahead. Take it in.
And then you think it's a good idea to go work at a church on the same day. Okay. The reason we want to talk with you was because of how many times many of us have heard you talk about the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Okay. So help me get from I'm going to work the day I have a new baby to where you're at now. What did you start to realize? What are some of the realizations that you had about Sabbath and rest?
So that's where I started, is actually understanding the word Sabbath. Sabbath itself literally just means to pause, to cease, and rest. So it's like, okay, I understand that. And then going deeper and understanding, well, actually, originally the institution of Sabbath came way before public gathering of worship in the Old Testament. They were separate types of events. Sabbath came like as early as the creation story, and the gathering of God's people did not come till hundreds, if not thousands of years later. So it was really interesting to me that they're two separate things. Thing two is, honestly, reading the Ten Commandments and understanding that, well, adultery is still, don't have adultery.
Right.
Like,
That's another podcast.
It feels like a duh. Like, duh, you shouldn't cheat on your wife. You shouldn't cheat on your husband, right?
Yeah.
Or you shouldn't lie. Like all these big things. But then like remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. How many times have I done that? How many times have I broken that commandment? Here's what I would say, and I would say to anyone listening, is like, it doesn't start perfect. It's like the muscle that needs to be exercised and is built over time. So first it was just like being disciplined to take one day off a week. Like just that. I would say I'm more disciplined with it now than I was back then. The things I did back then might have still been work in my own head, honestly. And it just over time I had to learn about what work was and what it was not, and what a healthy Sabbath for me was, which I do think is nuanced with everyone, honestly.
So you don't think that we rest all the same?
I don't. A coworker of mine, we've been working together for many years, finds a lot of rest in going to the gym. I don't at all. Right?
I'm with you.
For me, it's not a physical rest thing. It's actually a mental rest. My mind is one that just goes and goes and goes. Ideas, thoughts. I want to consume information. I love it. And to a point where I need help shutting my mind off. I have no problem not doing a lot of physical activity. Some people, it's the opposite. Maybe someone actually works in the field where they're very physical, construction work, something like that. And maybe their Sabbath will look different. Maybe it's actually more about intellectual stimulation and less physical stimulation. But to me, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Well, holy just means separate, different. So keeping the Sabbath that day different from what my normal week looked like meant stimulating my mind in different ways, reading something that had nothing to do with ministry or work, maybe out of pleasure, listening to a podcast, maybe like intellectual stimulation in a different arena. I love to travel. I love different cultures. Doing things that were healthy and builds me as a person and even my internal character, but wasn't necessarily directly connected to work.
So I heard you say Sabbath means pause, cease, rest. And what I think is cool about your story is, like, you said the first thing I had to do was just get consistent about taking a day off. It's like you've pressed pause. I always thought Sabbath meant Saturday. Like, is that a myth we can clear up?
I think the myth is where we confuse it with a day of worship. So we think Hebrew Shabbat might be that sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. Or Christians, most of them go to church on Sunday, so that's Sabbath. And I think one of the best concepts that helped me better display and honor the Sabbath in my own life and for God was to separate the two concepts. That public gathering of worship is a separate concept from getting the rest that God has called me towards. And I say calling with a very intentional use of that word.
So you pointed out that idea of keeping it holy as like keeping it separate from your work, from the normal things you do. How do you keep your Sabbath holy? Like, give us an example.
That's great. That's the real practical stuff. So I'm super disciplined to do things like turn off notifications on my phone. Unless it's like an emergency, there's no reason I need to be contacted. If it's an emergency, someone's going to call me. Right? But if it's not an emergency, I can choose when I want to read that email. Right? I can choose when to engage my mind in work or when not to. And I believe there are exceptions to the rule. I mean, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, right? Now, that's a whole different intellectual and theological thing because Jesus was Lord of the Sabbath. But then you actually watch his life, and he had his rest rhythms. When he does ministry with lots of crowds and all this, watch how many times it says Jesus withdrew and was alone. Jesus withdrew and prayed. He withdrew. And disciples got frustrated.
They're always looking for him.
He's
on the bottom of the boat.
He knew that he had his own rest rhythms, but they might have not been the traditional Sabbath, but they certainly were his Sabbath.
One of the things that I heard you say earlier that I thought was helpful is you compared Sabbath to exercise and how it's something you have to work at. And so I'm also wondering, like, when I exercise, I have this expectation that I'm immediately going to get fit. So if you practice Sabbath, am I immediately going to stop feeling stressed out or anxious?
Is that how it worked for you?
No, it's not. I wish it was like a magic button, but I think in Christianity, there's a lot of things we wish were like that, right? It's not, and it's not easy. In fact, I would say your spiritual enemy does not want you to do this. It will be difficult. You have to consistently set boundaries, talk about those boundaries with others, your friends and your coworkers, so they understand them, and then not beat yourself up when sometimes those boundaries are crossed. Just go back and learn from it and say, how can I shore this up so it's not crossing a boundary. Like, I don't have to have notifications. I can actually control the flow of information. It's constant tweaking, it's constant learning, it's constant growing, similar to any other discipline that we would choose to want to get better at. I relaxed some of those disciplines, and I started to honestly believe I'm not needed at work, and everybody could do it without me, that type of thing. But the other thing, too, is the importance of sleep.
Yeah.
We kind of know in a lot of societies that eating right and exercising, they're really important to our health. But the third leg of the stool is sleep. And I started to lose a lot of sleep. I don't know what came first, like hyperanxiety, depression, lack of sleep, but it all feeds into each other and becomes a snowball rolling down a mountain. And there was a period of time where I was sleeping 1-2 hours on average a night. And that just becomes extremely unhealthy.
What perspective change happened that brought you out of that time?
This is where it wraps back down to this command of rest. All the way back to creation day number 6. Like, God's pretty clear with man that he's created this beautiful earth and this garden and planted man there, and we're there to work it and steward it. And like, there's all this activity. And then he says, the first thing I want you to do is just be, though. Don't do. If I'm Adam, I'm like, I haven't done anything yet. Why do I need to rest, right? You just did all the work.
Man shows up, and then it's like, take a day off.
Right? Who I am is more important than what I do, and what I do flows out of that. I think it's interesting that when God reveals his name to Moses for the first time we hear it, he says, I am, which the transliteration is Yahweh. God even shows you he is before he does. In the priority of I am before I do, God has called me to be, and out of who I am and who he's called me to be, then I do. That priority, it changed my anxiety and depression. Not that I don't struggle with those things, honestly, but it's the same concept. It's not about me. The world's not going to fall apart if I don't do, and I can actually do better if I'm prioritizing being first.
So you were looking for meaning in the things that you were doing, and even though you had Sabbath in order, your mind was not there. It had this perspective of doing before being. So you needed that body, mind, and spirit rest.
Absolutely.
And that made the difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, big question. What would your life look like today if you had never figured out how to rest in Sabbath?
I don't think my marriage would be half as healthy as it is, nor my relationship with my kids. I don't think my leadership at church would be half as effective as it is. I think I'm a better leader. I think I serve people better that way because it's not about me, right? It would be drastically different in all realms of my life.
I thought you might say that. And so we just wanted to check to see if it's true. So we asked Heather, your wife.
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. You guys are so sneaky. Oh, whoa.
Hi, Josh. It's me. Surprise. So I just wanted to let you know that since you have become really more intentional, especially in these last few years, about rest and about working when you work and disconnecting when you need to, it has made a huge difference in our home. You are a better husband and a better dad, and you're a better friend because we get more of you when you're with us. You're more in the moment, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, but you really are. You're more with us when you're with us. You're not thinking about, oh, what else could I get done today, or what else might I think about today? You're just tangibly present with us, and I just thank you so much for taking it seriously because we love you and we want to be with you, and I love you, and it has meant a lot to me. Thank you.
So everyone listening can't see you right now.
That's right. I've just got tears going right now. A lot of times in life, we want these huge changes because huge changes you can see, but it's the hard incremental work that you don't see until you look back and realize how far you've come. Look back and realize that God had done a work and is still doing that work. And those little incremental changes over time are way bigger than that one big crying at the altar moment.
That's good. So I'm wondering, if everybody rests a little bit differently, how do we know if rest is rest?
What are the ingredients that can't change?
I think from a biblical perspective, it has to have the element of pause, cease, rest. So, and it has to have the element of set apart. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And the funny thing is, even in the Hebrew, that word remember, it's a pattern. It means keep doing this pause, cease, and rest, and keep it separate from the other days. It's really important. But even broader than that, understanding that sometimes we need to take periods of rest. So the word vacation comes to mind, right? And the way I take a vacation is going to be different from the way you take a vacation. The point is that everybody needs to take a break. It's like everybody needs that day. That's very clear in the Bible. And then the nuances are how you steward that day and manage that day. And same thing with the longer vacations, the breaks, things like that. How do you tailor them to you? And how do they work for you and your family too? But the non-negotiables almost is what you're asking. Whatever your work is, almost like a genre or the type of work you do, pause that. If you're knowledge worker, don't do that knowledge work on that day off. If you're in construction, don't go build someone else's house on your day off.
Someone needs to hear that right now.
Right. It's true.
It's important.
That disruption in the week is what God wants to use to speak.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm a pastor and sourdough baker from the San Francisco Bay Area. Work-life balance is something we all need to learn, and it's certainly true for pastors. Back in the 90s, I was newly married, in college, and living up near Seattle. My wife and I walked into Grand Central Bakery, an artisan sourdough bread bakery, and I was arrested by the beauty of the loaves. They have an orangey-like hue, like they're shining from the inside. It's called bloom, and the smell is just amazing. Something inside my heart woke up. I felt like I'd rediscovered something great that had been there all along. I looked at my wife and I said to her, I want to work here. It was the beginning of a lifelong hobby and a pursuit of great bread. Before commercial yeast was invented in the 19th century, all bread was sourdough. It's a simple, natural fermentation process that adds flavor and lightness to the bread. Good sourdough isn't dominated by sourness. It's sweet, tangy, nutty. It's a bouquet of flavor. If you don't like sourdough, probably the supermarket bread you've tried isn't real sourdough. Lots of bread sold as sourdough is just flavored with vinegar. All bread would be made with the sourdough process if it wasn't for one thing: time. Time is expensive. Sourdough takes 2 to 3 days instead of 2 to 3 hours to bake. And bakeries have figured out how to use yeast and dough conditioners to produce bread that's predictable, fast, and shelf stable. But that bread can't match the flavor, texture, and crust of real sourdough. It's an entirely different thing. Good things take time, right? But there's more than that. There's a specific part of this sourdough process that's a metaphor for living life to the fullest. To make sourdough bread, you mix together the starter, flour, water, and salt, just 4 ingredients, and then you knead the dough. You let it rise, you shape the dough, you let it rise again, then you bake the loaves. But there's an in-between step. And if you do this in-between step, your dough will be resilient. Your bread will rise higher, have a richer color, and better flavor and texture. Raymond Calville, a revered French baker, discovered this in the 70s, that if you cut back on the amount of working or kneading the dough and instead give it about a 20-minute rest before the first rise, it greatly improves the outcome of the loaf. If you only knead the dough without resting it in between, it requires more kneading and still can't form as many gluten bonds, which trap the CO2 to make the bread rise. So you add this rest, and it's like, at a point, work plus rest accomplishes more than work alone. Another way of saying it is that the dough matures faster and better if it's allowed to rest between the work. Adding rest to the recipe actually increases the efficiency of the rise. Do you need to give yourself permission to rest? You can rise higher if you add rest to your work.
Hi friends, this is Abigail. A while back, our church went through a message series called A Better Way, where Pastor Craig shared about his personal experience practicing rest and Sabbath. We loved everything he shared with us and wanted to make sure you heard this encouraging part of the conversation.
Well, for one thing, I think rest is an incredibly important biblical perspective that we should take, and weekly rest is really important. And I can imagine all the people in LifeGroup right now that probably like me, we haven't always honored the Sabbath, and so that's an issue. And then disconnecting in our current culture, we're always connected. And so I think that little by little, in many ways, we have progress with technology, but it's also we've become a prisoner to it. And so I think a lot of people, whether they have a grueling job or not, probably find themselves connected more often. And so we tried to disconnect and to really unwind, and it didn't go exactly as we had hoped, but in many ways, we still were committed to it. And so we just pressed into it and said, even though this isn't as fun or engaging as we'd want it, it's still really, really important to rest. And so we went it that way. And ultimately, sometimes whenever life's not going your way, it's really easy to be upset or complain or be negative. And I ultimately had this sense and try to always keep the perspective that, God, you are doing something. I don't like it. I'm not excited about it. This isn't what I chose, but I want to look for you in it. It's really easy to give up when something doesn't go the way we want it to. And sometimes even people say it must not be God's will or whatever, or it could be that you just aren't good at it yet, or it could be there's spiritual opposition or whatever. So I think if anything's important, if it doesn't go well the first time, consider that a lesson and try to make it better the second time, but don't walk away from the important disciplines.
I've actually really been focusing on rest over the last year or so, and it's been way more challenging than I thought it would be.
So what's been the most challenging part?
I really want it to be perfect. I just want to say I'm going to choose rest on this day, and it is going to be perfect. And then it's like the day comes and goes, and it's the next day, and I feel like I just wasted a day. But I also know that it's not about being perfect.
Right.
And then there's a different element, which is that my husband rests way differently than I do. And I didn't even know that people didn't just want to isolate and watch Gilmore Girls by themselves in the dark. I didn't realize that there were other options for rest until I met my husband. But we figured out that sometimes we really enjoy having a no weekend, where we choose one weekend in advance where we say no to any ask or invitation. And so then that weekend is intentionally kept open for us to rest.
Yeah.
And then I think what I've realized personally is that I've really had to figure out what things I enjoy doing that are also restful and not feeling like a task or thing I have to do.
Yeah.
So for example, a few things that I've found in the last year or so, I really enjoy doing puzzles. I recently tried some watercolors, water painting, and I even have a partial blanket that I've been crocheting.
I think you're right. Rest does look different for everyone. Especially as I listen to you, maybe the most consistent aspect of rest is that we have to let go of control. Maybe rest should feel a lot like trust. And so when we rest, then we remind ourselves that we are not holding the whole world together, that we are not God. And one of my favorite scriptures, probably top 3 favorite scriptures, is Matthew 11:28-30. And Jesus is talking. He's actually just been talking about how he is the revelation of God. And he says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me and watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So I think Jesus refers to rest as a light burden because it's God who's doing the heavy lifting. And that doesn't mean that rest is easy to do. either. It's going to take practice. It might be awkward at first. You're going to have to plan for it. You're going to have to do it on purpose. But don't let rest become another way to perform or to have control. Rest is about trusting God and letting Him restore you. So even something like baking sourdough or making partial blankets can be rest. I mean, unless crocheting is your day job, then that's not rest.
So this week with your life group, friends or family, talk about this question. How would you describe your relationship with rest? And what are some things you do that are restful? Hey friend, remember to look in the show notes for the conversation guide. You'll find the self-care guide, as well as some discussion questions, a Bible plan, and more. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Have a great week.